the reason why people start getting really serious about stroke primary and secondary prevention, because situation now is really difficult to ignore. For years, maybe tens of years, people were talking about importance of prevention. The first kind of call that prevention is the medicine of the future was about 100 or maybe even more years ago. Not really much done in the area of stroke prevention in particular. Not to forget other non-communicable disorders, but because it was a World Stroke Congress, we will be talking about stroke prevention. And what's happening over the last 30, 40 years is the unprecedented growth in stroke burden globally, across all countries in the world. The number of people who are affected by stroke, die from stroke, or remain disabled from stroke, almost tripled. And that increase cannot be explained entirely by the population growth and aging of the population. We know that stroke is primarily disease of the elderly, but global burden of disease studies show that about 50% of all strokes now happening in people younger than 70 years old. So it's not really the disease of the elderly anymore. It is a disease of the working age people. And unlike absolute number of people affected by stroke, we enjoyed for years the continuous decline in stroke incidence, mortality rates, age standardized rates, globally and in many countries, except low middle income countries, where the incidence and mortality rates of stroke started to increase from about 40 years ago, 50 years ago. But in developed countries, yes, we enjoyed the decrease. But last 5-10 years, this trend was put on hold. And last 5 years, we observe increase in the age standardized rates, incidence, mortality, disability adjusted life years lost, prevalence. And that increase is particularly noticeable and most pronounced in younger people younger than 60 years old. In older people, there is still a trend toward decreasing. So this situation cannot be ignored anymore by policymakers, politicians, because if it will continue, by 2050, the current burden will increase 50%. And our health services are not developing in the same pace as the increasing burden of stroke. So there will be shortage of everything: beds, specialists, rehabilitation services, and that will be a real strategy for millions of people affected by stroke. And the only way to stop that real pandemic, I would say, with stroke, it is more pandemic than COVID-19, I must tell you, in terms of the number of people affected by the disease. These politicians and policymakers cannot ignore anymore. That's why they started prevention. The only reliable way to reduce the number of people affected by stroke, not to improve outcomes. We're quite well progressed and advanced in treatment of acute stroke, ischemic stroke in particular, but not in stroke prevention. Primary, new strokes, and secondary, recurrent strokes. Recurrent strokes rate did not change much over the last 40 years. It remains in the range of 20 to 30%. With rare exemptions, some only countries managed to reduce the rate of recurrent stroke. Overall, globally, did not change much. It's a big growing problem. That's why prevention is the hot topic recognized by United Nations, World Health Organization, all NGOs, and politicians just started realize the significance and the scope of the problem, but still awareness is far from ideal. Still many politicians ignore this problem, overshadowed by cardiovascular problems, cancer, and so forth. So we need to raise awareness, number one. We need to improve primary and secondary prevention, number two.